When you hear the word psychopath, you probably think of all those movie villains, right? Cold, calculating, totally dangerous. But what if I told you that for decades, science itself was kind of working from a flawed script? It turns out the real story is so much more complex and, honestly, a lot more hopeful.
So let's just kick things off with a big question. Is the psychopath, that single monstrous figure we all picture, is that actually a myth? Kind of like a scientific fiction that's been leading us down the wrong path for, like, a century? Okay, let's get into it.
All right, so for the longest time, neuroscience was staring at this huge paradox. You see, researchers were using this one standardized test to give people a single psychopathy score. But when they actually looked inside the brains of people who got the exact same score, what they found just didn't add up at all.
And this right here, this is the whole problem in a nutshell. Imagine you've got two people and they both score, say, a 30 out of 40 on the test. So boom, they're both labeled psychopaths. But then you look at their brain scans and they are completely different. I mean, one person's brain might show less volume in a key area, while the other person shows normal or maybe even more volume in that exact same spot. How on earth is that possible?
Here's the thing. This wasn't just some glitch in the MRI machine. The problem was way, way deeper. For years, scientists were trying to find the psychopath brain because everyone just assumed psychopathy was one single thing. They were basically asking the wrong question from the very beginning.
The big breakthrough finally came when researchers just stopped looking for a single type. Instead, they started looking for ingredients. They realized psychopathy isn't this one solid thing. No, it's more like a recipe, a combination of different independent personality traits that you can mix and match in all kinds of ways.
And this new framework is honestly brilliant. It's called the triarchic model. Think of these three traits like their primary colors. First, you've got boldness. This is your charismatic, super resilient, dominant leader type. Then you have meanness. That's the cold, callous part, the real lack of empathy. And finally, there's disinhibition, which is just that reckless, impulsive, I'm gonna act now and think about it later vibe.
So, okay, how do these ingredients actually mix together? Well, take a look at this. If you have someone with a lot of boldness and a lot of meanness, but they have low disinhibition, they might end up being a pretty ruthless but very successful CEO. They're in control. But you mix high meanness with high disinhibition, and you're way more likely to get that impulsive, violent offender who ends up in prison. See? We were using the same label for completely different people, all because of the mix of traits.
Now, what's really cool is that this new model doesn't just describe a personality. It points us directly to how the brain is actually learning from the world in a different way. Each one of these core traits seems to be linked to a very specific glitch in the way the brain processes experiences.
So let's start with what's called the reward deficit. This one's tied to those charming, manipulative traits. For these people, it's like their brain's reward system has the volume turned way down. They can understand you're praising them, they get the concept of a reward, but that signal doesn't have the oomph to actually change how they behave. The good feedback just doesn't stick.
Then you've got the punishment deficit, and this is linked to that meanness trait. With this one, the brain's alarm system for bad consequences is pretty much offline. So when they see someone else in pain, or even when they face punishment themselves, the brain's response is just flat. It's not that they don't get the idea of punishment. It's that their brain doesn't register it as a serious warning to back off.
And the third one, the volatility deficit, is tied to disinhibition. And this one is fascinating. It's like the brain is running on this deep-seated belief that the world is completely random and chaotic. And think about it. If you really believe the rules are just changing all the time, why would you ever bother to learn from feedback? It would feel totally pointless, right? And that's what drives that impulsive, short-term thinking. Long-term planning just doesn't make sense in a world you see as totally unpredictable.
Okay, so if we're talking about specific learning glitches in the brain, well, that completely flips our old ideas about treatment on their head. For decades, the general feeling was that psychopathy was basically untreatable, a therapeutic dead end. But this new science? It tells a much different story.
This question, which was posed more than 20 years ago, it just perfectly captures that old mindset. The entire clinical world was just soaked in this pessimism, this belief that even trying to treat psychopathy was a waste of time. And of course, that became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because nobody thought it could be treated, almost nobody really tried.
But get this, that same analysis from back in 2002 found something incredible. It found that when different therapies were combined and tailored to the individual, even with what they knew back then, they could get a success rate as high as 88%. 88! That number should have shattered the whole myth of the untreatable psychopath.
So why all the pessimism? Well, it's because the old one-size-fits-all approach was just doomed from the start. We were basically giving the exact same medicine to patients with totally different illnesses. I mean, you can't treat a punishment deficit the same way you treat a volatility deficit. It's just never going to work.
And this brings us to the really exciting part, a full-on revolution in therapy. Instead of trying to treat this vague, scary label, we can now target the specific learning glitch in the brain. It's a huge shift from pessimism to precision.
So the new path forward is actually super logical. Step 1, you figure out the person's unique mix of traits. Are they mostly bold, mean, disinhibited? Step 2, you connect that to the specific learning glitch we just talked about. And then, step 3, you design a therapy that speaks directly to that specific wiring problem. And here are some actual examples of what that looks like. For someone with a reward deficit, a simple good job won't do anything. But a reward that's tied to something they are personally, intensely passionate about, that might actually work. For the punishment deficit, you can't just rely on consequences. Instead, you can focus on cognitive training, helping them literally practice understanding what's going on in other people's heads. And for the volatility deficit, the absolute key is creating a stable, predictable environment to prove to their brain that, hey, the world isn't so random after all, and learning is actually worth it. All of this really leads us to one last big question. By understanding the specific brain wiring behind all these traits, are we even looking at a disorder that needs to be cured, or are we looking at a form of neurodiversity, a fundamental difference in how some brains are built that needs to be understood and managed instead of just being condemned? Now, reframing it like this doesn't excuse harmful behavior, not at all, but it does offer a much smarter and way more hopeful path forward.